Thank you for subscribing to Miniature Dork Universe.
Yeah, I didn't like or subscribe to that micro nerd space thing, and now all the hot babes want to suck my...
Hello and welcome back to Miniature Dork Universe. Today I'll be talking about the armored vehicle types that I'll be using for my Salerno project for both the Germans and the Americans. This video will go over the kits that I chose to use to depict these vehicle types, and I'll go over the pros and cons of each one, things that I liked, things that I didn't like so much. Let's move on to the individual kits of the vehicles and some of the features that I've added myself. I'll start with the Panzer IVs that I chose to use, and in this case they are the Dragon Mini Armour. Let's see if I can get this in here. Dragon Mini Armour 1/144 scale, which is the same kind of scale. I have the Ausf G and the later Ausf H, both of which were used. And the two kits are essentially the same. The H comes with the addition of side armor Schürzen, and the G comes with the shorter L43 barrel, although interestingly it has the rounded sort of muzzle brake on it that the earlier F2 version had, and some of the Gs had it as well, but more commonly is the non sort of round muzzle brake. Let's see. So, and the good thing is they all come with turret Schürzen. I guess it must have just been on the sprue to start with. And that works out well because practically all of the Panzer IVs in the Italy campaign in that era, the late 1943, have the Schürzen, and most of them had the turret Schürzen only. They took the side Schürzen off in most cases because the streets in Italy were so narrow that they were getting torn off, essentially. So they just negated that problem by taking them off. However, some did maintain the side Schürzen. So yeah, I had to do at least one with the Schürzen because it's kind of cool. So for this G model, the only really difference between the G and H Schürzen is the H has this little weird bit on the front, and you just need to cut that off and then it works pretty well. So overall, I think these kits look a bit better than the Victrix ones that are available. The other thing that's included in the H kit somewhere in here is, for a period of time in the earlier production, they were putting these cylindrical air intakes. They might have had extra filters for dust and things like that, and those were kind of optional. However, this has the kind of earlier radio mast on the side, so that kind of gets in the way of that air filter. I think if you want to put that on, you're going to have to remove that piece, which is kind of a pain in the ass. I don't know if I'm willing to do that, especially for a 12mm kit. Something I've decided to do, and I do this with all my 15mm tanks, sort of inspired by Flames of War kits, is I've magnetized the turrets. So it needed a bit of modification to put those magnets in, but I used plastic sheet and plastic tubing from Evergreen and some rare earth magnets, and then they stick on. And I just like the way that keeps the turrets on. I find, I really don't like kits where there's the little tabs because it just grinds the turret into the paint and it doesn't turn very well. This has a nice smooth turn, but the turret's not going to flop off if you turn it upside down. You could just as easily file in, though, a little slot and then glue a little bar of plastic rod across the bottom and then jam it on like that. But I prefer the magnets To add variety and realism to these kits, I also purchased some of these Plastic Soldier Company, it's just called like a basic German StuH, but it's all Panzer IV stuff. There's Panzer IV spare wheels, Panzer IV tracks. These could also be used for Panzer IIIs, so I'll use those for my Sturmgeschützes. There's some boxes and fuel drums. It's not the most actually useful stowage pack, but I do like that there's the spare wheels and the spare tracks especially. There's tons of jerry cans that are available in a lot of the kits, so you can throw those on. I find I have tons and tons of those. You can see where I added some of the PSC parts, like here is one of the spare wheels at the front, and some of the spare track links at the back. I think one of these has spare track links, no, maybe not. Oh yeah, this one has some on the front. I left the bolted one plain, mostly because I like the look of the bolts on the front. Another disadvantage of this Panzer IV kit is all the tracks in the kits are too short. So what I've had to do is buy an entire other kit so I can have the tracks to cut out the pieces that are missing. And I glue the tracks in a way so that along the top is where the gap is, and then I fill in the gap with the piece that I got from the spare kit. But as it turns out, the spare kit had a lot of stuff that I used in it, and I'll get into that more when I talk about the Sturmgeschütz IIIs that I'm doing. For marking them up, the Dragon kits came with a bunch of decals, like the Balkan Kreuz and all that stuff. So I'll have a bunch of the German crosses to use for the tanks, like an excess of them, to be honest, which I'm not complaining about. And then from I-94 Enterprises, I bought these 144 German numbers that they're yellow outlined with black. So the 16th Panzer Division in Italy at the time had that kind of numbering system in those colors. I want to keep them kind of generic, sort of, but I like the way these numbers look, and it's kind of different than what's typical on German vehicles. So even though it kind of makes them look specifically like 16th Panzer Division vehicles, they're going to be kind of generic too. I'm not going to put 16th Panzer Division logos on it because, well, I just don't have access to anything like that. So that's what I'm going to use for the numbers and markings. And I think that's all I have to say about the Panzer IV. Let's move on to the next. Next up are the Sturmgeschütz III Ausf Gs. I think there was Fs available too, but I went with the Gs because we can get these great Sturmgeschütz III Gs from Victrix. They're 12mm range, but they scale out nicely, obviously, with the 1144. So that's good times. And these kits look great, although there are a few things. Of course, there's always, nothing's perfect, right? There's a few things about these that I had to change. Well, I didn't have to change them, I just did them because I'm kind of OCD. And if you are, you might want to do the same kinds of things. Each one of these vehicles, I'll probably do a separate video when I'm painting them and finishing them and talk a bit more in detail about that for each particular vehicle type. The StuG IIIs come with a couple options. They have the side Schürzen, which again, like the Panzer IV in Italy, they often took those off because the streets were narrow and they were getting hung up on buildings and things and just getting ripped right off, so they just decided to take them off. But like with the Panzer IV, there are, you know, photographic examples of vehicles that maintained the Schürzen. But the standard sort of German vehicle in Italy throughout the theater has the Schürzen taken off, except for, of course, the turret Schürzen, which was left on. So this, you get the option for the straight up Sturmgeschütz III Ausf G with the L, I can't remember if it had an L43 or an L48 gun, but whatever, 75mm gun. And you also have a version for the Sturmgeschütz 42, which had a 105mm howitzer, which is, get this guy out of the way, which is this piece here. So there's the regular gun barrel, and then there was a fewer number with the 105 howitzer. Starting in late 1942, the Sturmgeschütz 42s with the 105mm howitzers were starting to be introduced into the Sturmgeschütz Avalanche, which included, I think, 3 batteries. I have a list of the 1944 establishment where there's a whole platoon of them, but I'm not sure how they were allocated to Sturmgeschütz units in 1943. If there was a platoon of them or if they just threw in a couple vehicles to augment the firepower. So that I can't tell you, unfortunately, but I'm sure if you search enough, you'll find out. The thing that was missing in the kit that I really wished is some of the stowage that was common with the Sturmgeschütz III. Like, it would have been nice to have more spare track links, and it would have definitely been nice to have the spare wheels that are common. They're kind of missing. So it's a fairly nicely detailed kit. It just would have been great if they just added some of those extras. So what I did, when I mentioned earlier how the Dragon Panzer IV kits didn't have enough tracks, I bought a Dragon, the StuG III, the one with the 150mm howitzer. I bought one of those just to cannibalize it for all of the wheels. I think the wheels are here. The wheels are just in this bag. So yeah, I'm using the wheels to make my own spares, and that one actually had a couple spares, so I'll have enough to do all my Panzer IVs. And I also used the tracks that came with it to fill in those gaps in the Panzer IV tracks. So I used those for the wheels. Some of you might think it's a little bit extreme to buy a kit just to cannibalize for spare parts, but these, you know, these small scale kits aren't very expensive, and in some cases you can get them on eBay for free shipping. And I think that was the case with that StuG III. Something else I got from Arrowhead Miniatures, which unfortunately has kind of gone under. I think he's selling off the remainder of his stock, and unless someone buys his little company out, I don't think we'll see these Arrowhead Miniatures. But we interrupt this regularly scheduled bullshit to give you this special Miniature Dork news bulletin. To get the lowdown on the status of Arrowhead Miniatures, I contacted the owner on Facebook. He informed me that he has decided, with the help of a Yorkshire wargame group, to continue on. It will take him some time to rebuild his stock of metal miniatures, but there are 3 new releases coming. Check out the Arrowhead website for more details. But he has sets of photo-etched German Pioneer tools, so I got a few of those. So in cases where they're missing, especially with some of the 3D printed vehicles, I can use these, but I'll also use them for things that may be missing here or updates. There's a Sturmgeschütz unit in Italy where the S tow hook was sort of attached to this front plate. Another issue with the Victrix kit is that they've given it the late version hatch for the loader, where the hatch opens side to side instead of front to back. This hatch was put on when they put the sort of remotely fired MG34, a periscope fired machine gun here, and it was so that the loader could open up the hatch while that machine gun was mounted and reload it, which would have been a pretty scary job, I think. So in order to fix that, I've cut it out and used plastic sheet to make new hatches. I'm going to put a couple basic little hinges on it using plastic rod, but nothing too crazy. And the thing that they always get wrong with the Sturmgeschütz III, especially in these smaller kits, is that The MG34 shield was held up by the front part of the hatch. So in order to make that proper, you have to open the hatch and rest it up against the MG34 shield. To add crews to these Sturmgeschütz IIIs, the kit comes with one kind of crew figure, and he's kind of hunched up and weird looking. So I'm going to use these Arrowhead, which again unfortunately is the company that's sort of on its last legs closing down. But I managed to get these German tank crews. They come in 4 poses. There's 3 standing and 2 sitting. So I cut them down at the waist, and I'll place them in those open hatches. And they're very nice. They look good. They definitely look better than the Victrix figure, although they're a little bit maybe skinnier than the Victrix figure. So if you must have your crews looking exactly the same size as your infantry, that could be an issue. But in my case, I kind of don't care. Although I can be pretty neurotic about the scale size of figures, and especially in that sometimes it bugs me, and in other cases like with these crews, I'd rather have a wicked looking crew than have it be exactly the same size as the infantry. Although I don't think these are bad, I think these are looking pretty close. And the last thing I'll say about the Sturmgeschütz III is the markings I've chosen. So I have a bunch of those spare Balkan cruises from the Dragon kits, and these are 1/144 scale from District Miniatures, and they're just red numbers. They're sold as being for the Bundeswehr, like the modern German army, but the numbers look very German, and just straight up red numbers were common. Obviously for the Americans, we're going to be using M4 Shermans. So in this case I have a mix of M4A1s, sort of early and mid sort of production, and then early, well actually I have a late M4 Sherman, but I'm probably going to switch out one of the earlier turrets from the M4A1s to make it a more backdated version of the M4, just to keep it consistent with the Italian campaign. So these are all 3D prints, and they're very close in scale. They're from different manufacturers, but they're very close in scale, and they look quite good together. The first one is from Anschluss Miniatures, and it's the early M4A1 with the M3 style suspension and the smaller mantlet on the gun. In this case there's a little bit of an air bubble in there that I'm going to have to take off, which is kind of a pain in the ass, but nothing too terrible. And his neighbor is something I got off eBay, just a private seller. It's not really a company, and it's very similar looking in scale, very similar, and the turret looks almost the same, so maybe it's a rip-off, I don't know. But in this case the tracks come off, and the tracks on this are the later version of the M4A1 tracks. So just for variety, we have one with a bit later, and then the M4 is from Scale Fiend Miniatures, and like I said, I'll probably just take one of the turrets off of an M4A1. I got a few of these kits, so I'll just backdate it so it looks more like 1943 Italy. And I'll have a platoon of the M4s and maybe a couple of the M4A1s. I kind of like the M4A1 with the cast hull. Something I'd say about the M4A1 kits though is the orientation of the hatch is a little funny. It is possible because that hatch spins around, but I think it's more common for the hatch to open side to side than front to back. The 50 caliber mount on it may have, if they wanted to keep that clear, they may have spun the hatch around, I don't know. So it's a little detail that's kind of weird, but it's not the end of the world. It's not an impossible configuration, so we'll run with it. It's a small gripe, not a big one. These 3D printed kits are very nicely detailed for the size, and they're consistent with the German kits that I have. There's some really nice details around the guards over the lights, some of the towing hooks, which are actually like hooks, which is pretty awesome, around the turret and the hull. The co-driver's machine gun. They had direct vision ports in the earlier versions, and those are depicted. Those are pretty cool for the driver and co-driver. The only thing that's missing on these kits are any of the sort of pioneer tools. But luckily, it just so happens that Brengun Model Accessories has a set of photo-etched US tank tools. Sorry, the glare is probably driving you nuts. So I got a couple sets of those so I can tank tool these up, and obviously I'm going to cover them with StuH so that they look proper for the period. And then also, ideally, for Shermans or any vehicles in the Italian theater in this small scale, I got these from I-95 Enterprises too. These are from Scale Specialties, and they're 1/144 Mediterranean, North Africa, and Italy theater US markings. So yeah, these come with all the markings you need for the Tunisian campaign, Sicily, Italy, and a bunch of like the blue registration numbers and things that show up in the earlier sort of Italy campaign. So I've already used a couple of these for Jeeps. Tiny little stars. It's great. You need magnification glasses for some of these, but if you're like me and you like having markings all over your vehicles, these are great. And the quality of the decals are really nice. They don't really silver badly, and they're nice and thin. I really like all of the products from I-95. Or is it I-94? I can't remember. But all of their decals I give a big seal of approval to. So that's all I can say about the Sherman. We'll move on to the next. Next for the Americans are M10 tank destroyers. And once again, this is a Victrix kit. Here's how they come. They come in sprues of 2. We'll take this guy out for a second. They come in sprues of 2. We'll just show you one because that's what's fitting in my zoom. Hopefully we're in focus. And it comes with the 3 crew members for the turret. And it's a very basic kit. It has the earlier sort of, I don't know if that was a counterweight or some kind of stowage hatch, but the earlier and mid, I guess that's a mid-production. I think the earlier one was even smaller than that. And then they got larger as the production went on. They had one called the duckbill, and the duckbill was sort of the later version than the version that was on most of the Commonwealth M10s, including the Achilles. But for Italy, this is the guy you want. It's a bit light on stowage and little extras, and some of the details are missing, but again, I have those tools so I can add some of the stuff that's missing. And here I've ground in, there's an area for the radio mast that goes on. And this one I've added stowage. This stowage is from various manufacturers. I think there's some of it's from the Arrowhead that's kind of going out of business, and some of it's from Pendraken. And this 50 cal is from Pendraken. It's kind of a crusty, it's not very super detailed, so I've cut off the barrel. I'm going to replace it with something that looks a little nicer, but it's better than no 50 caliber at all, because most of these have the 50 mounted on the turret, and tons of stowage mounted on the turret, but also on the front of the hull, back of the hull, everywhere. I'm leaving some of these areas bare though, because again, I want to use my super flashy US decals for the Mediterranean theaters. And they scale out lovely with the Shermans. This was a bit boxier, so it may have looked a bit bulkier in real life, but it's actually a lot lighter armor than a standard Sherman, but a bit faster. They were intended as tank hunters, but in Italy they were often used as almost like support indirect fire artillery, but even in some cases they were used almost like assault guns alongside with the infantry. So overall, it's a nice kit. I think it looks good, especially against the fours. The guns might be a bit beefier than they actually were, but I'm not going to get too worried about that. As well, I added magnets to the turrets so that the turrets don't fly off anytime I pick it up. But I'll also, for casualties like destroyed tank markers for the games, I'm going to have a magnetized like explosion that I can also stick on the top and keep that from getting knocked off on the game table while a game is in play, for example. And I'll do the same with the Shermans. The Shermans allow for a magnet to be put in. I'll just drill a shallow, or grind in a shallow recess for the magnet to be glued in, and then those will just snap on nice like these. I'll probably add the 50 calibers to the Shermans as well. This concludes my little review of my Italian theater all-stars for both the Germans and the Americans, and of course as I go I'll post videos on each individual vehicle type as I'm building them and painting them, and go into more details about any of the more fiddly parts of the construction. And of course you don't have to go all out in detail these. I just do it because I like it. You know, I think it looks cool when these tiny little things are bursting with details. But all the kits pretty much go together, especially these two Victrix kits. They go together pretty easy. There are a few issues, but I'll go over those in future videos. The Dragon kit goes together pretty well, but again, like I said, there are a few issues like the tracks, and I'll cover those. And of course the 3D print is 100% together. The only issue will be attaching these Pioneer tools to the back, which can be a bit of a dick. However, I do have a video on working with small parts, but also I'll review some of that when I'm actually putting these together, and I'll give you a video of that. And some of these American vehicles, they're going to be quite colorful. Some of them have a, you know, like a two-tone camouflage scheme, and they have the brighter stars that have yellow outlines instead of white. So, you know, I'll give a full sort of construction and painting tutorial of those if you're interested in doing this theater for yourself. So that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in to this round of Miniature Dork Universe, and we'll see you next time. Something.